Hi there, this is Chris Harvey again, and this is going to be a tutorial video on how you can use your Honours Project Workbook, completing the two assessments that are included inside it, and that is the project proposal and then the logbook for your actual project. So I'm going to talk you through that, the structure of the workbook, and how you can add work to it, how you can save it, and so forth. And there's also a written guide on this that is available on the Sciences Toolkit Blackboard, and all of this material will also be made available via the individual module blackboards once those become available, which of course won't be the case until the over the summer, or but we'll try to get it done as soon as possible. I'll let you know when that happens, but it might take a few more weeks. Okay, so here's the kind of landing page where you arrive at the beginning of your online workbook once you've activated it, and what you'll find here is a video by featuring Steve Trim, one of our industry partners at Venom Tech at Discovery Park, and he is going to, if you watch the video, going to tell you a little bit about the importance of online workbooks and why we use them in industry. Then you'll have a brief rundown of what the workbook is for, essentially what I'm telling you about now, and how to use it. The only real deadline you have to worry about for the moment is the deadline on the 23rd of October, which it mentions up here, 2020, which is a long way away. That's 5 months from now, and that is essentially a few weeks into the beginning of semester 1 next academic year. Now, I know in one of the briefings I did on the, or in the briefing I did on the Honours Project in semester 2 a few months ago, I mentioned that there's a soft deadline, which is in the beginning of June, to have a project sorted out. Otherwise, you would be assigned a project. Of course, under the circumstances with the coronavirus and everything else, that is completely gone out the window. So all I would say to you is please plan and prepare a project as soon as you can, under the circumstances. But the assessment of the proposal itself and when you'll be checked whether you have a viable proposal is going to be the 23rd of October 2020. But the sooner you have that done, the sooner you can have that work ready, the sooner you can actually start your project if needs be, but also rest assured that you have a good and solid project to begin with next academic year. Okay. So it talks you through a whole bunch of things about the workbook. It has some useful contact details here. So it has my email address here as the module lead, then the various different subject leads or program advocates, so for animal science, human biology, and so forth. Please use those as and when you need them. There's also an email link to the technicians, which is going to be very important because you will be using that email to send through your equipment list and other requests you have. Your risk assessment, for example, needs to be checked by technicians. So that's where that email address is on the cover page of your, or on the introductory page, the how to use this logbook page of your workbook, okay? That's the kind of landing page. Then let's go on to the next page, which is the cover page. So you'll be able to navigate through the different pages of your workbook by clicking on the little banners here on the top. I should mention now that you will only see, when you first activate your workbook, you'll only see the first, second, third, and fourth pages, and I think you also will see the fifth one here. The weekly logbook you will not be able to see yet when you first activate your workbook, and that is because that will only become active for you once you've actually completed the project proposal. We've seen your risk assessment. Your supervisor has agreed that it's a viable project and it can go ahead, and you have completed the risk assessment, like I said, the ethics checklist and so forth. So once all that is done, and I'll show you where that is located in the workbook in a moment, then you will get access to the weekly logbook and essentially get the green light to start your project. Okay? So don't worry if you don't see this part of your workbook yet. That will become available as and when you need it. Okay, so the cover page of your workbook. This is where you can record the basic details. Well, your name, obviously, your supervisor, the title of your project, and the technician that has been assigned to you. So you'll be assigned a technician who's going to be your first point of contact for the technician team, and that information will become available in the next couple of weeks. You don't need it yet. If you urgently need it because you have a risk assessment ready to go, contact me or contact your supervisor. They can sort something out for you. But within the next couple of weeks, we plan to have a Excel spreadsheet with your name against technician uploaded to the Sciences Toolkit Blackboard, where you can then see who your technician is. Okay? So the next page then is a short note on the COVID-19 situation, obviously. We're planning for next academic year to hopefully deliver as normal as possible experience for you in terms of doing your honours project. However, the situation is evolving, it's changing all the time. The government guidance is changing and being modified all the time. So really, all we can do for the moment is plan for every eventuality. And that's what this page is all about. It talks you through the contingencies you should be planning for in terms of different types of projects. So what if you were doing a fieldwork project? What if you were doing a project which involves external partners or collaborators? How would you handle that under different coronavirus scenarios? So it gives you a lot of recommendations to kind of minimize any exposure your project might have to that kind of risk. So just read through that carefully, please, as you start planning, to keep that in mind with your planning process. The next page then is the project proposal. This is where you will be able to complete the first assessment for the module. So remember, there are 4 assessments for this module. The first one is the proposal, and that is going to represent 10% of the module mark overall. It gives you a step-by-step guide as to how to kind of develop the proposal. It doesn't have to be written from scratch by you with no input from your supervisor or anything like that. It is a plan for your project that needs to evolve and develop in conversation with your supervisor, and also where necessary with feedback from technicians. So this should be an iterative process, right? You work on it, you develop it, you improve it, and it all depends. Sometimes your supervisor will have an ongoing research project which they need some help with, and if you say, that sounds interesting, I'd like to do that for my project, then that could become your project, which makes the whole planning procedure a bit more streamlined, a bit more straightforward. On the other hand, if you have an idea of your own that you really want to pursue and develop, then this is your opportunity to do so. Talk to your supervisor and discuss with them what the plan is and how you could carry this kind of project out. Remember that your supervisor is going to be, in the first instance, your personal academic tutor. Okay? That should be the rule. There might be some really unusual circumstances where that isn't possible, but please, for the moment, work with your personal academic tutor, develop the project as far as possible with them, and you can always kind of get a second opinion from, or they can ask a colleague for a second opinion. But in the past, things have gotten very complicated where people have spoken to multiple academics and gotten conflicting information and conflicting advice. So stick with your personal academic tutor, that's your supervisor, and ask them for any advice as you develop your project. Okay. So for the proposal, you will need a title to type in here. You will have to give us a location. So where are you going to be carrying out your work? Is it going to be in the labs? Which labs? Is it going to be in the field? Which location in the field? Each of these boxes has a word count against it. So you can see that here, this one has 30 words maximum. Do not exceed that word count, right? If you were writing this proposal for a funding body, they would also have strict word limits on some of their the submissions. The next one is research questions and hypotheses. So here's where you would outline the key or underlying research question you wish to answer with your project, and then the hypotheses that follow from that research question that you want to test with the data you're going to gather. So remember that any project will begin with a research question. How does does this antibiotic have a different effect on these 2 different types of bacteria? Question mark, that's a question. And then you would test that by designing an experiment where you test a hypothesis. So for example, exposing bacterial colonies on agar plates to 2 different antibiotics will result in different number of bacterial colonies in those 2 plates, right? That's testable. You can count the number of colonies and test that. So that's what we want here, right? It says state at least 1 testable hypothesis and at least 1 research question. So that means it can be quite simple. 1 research question, 1 hypothesis. It can be more complicated, multiple research questions, multiple hypotheses, but try to keep it simple. And again, the word limit there kind of indicates that to you as well. Project rationale. here's where you have to outline why the project you're doing is important, why we should be interested in what you're going to be researching, why you're interested in it, what the wider relevance of it is. So it should give a bit of a background into the problem you're addressing and why it's an important problem to be addressing. Okay. Then the literature review. Here's where you want to tell us about the reading you're going to do in preparation for your project. So you want to pick 3 topic areas in the literature. So so that literature should all be review articles or primary research articles. Do not use websites. Do not use textbooks. It all has to be from the primary or from the research literature, right? Peer-reviewed literature. So tell us which areas you will be consulting. So for example, if you're doing a project on yeast cloning, you might want to do, cover or cite some papers or read some papers in the area of yeast culturing. You might want to cite some papers in the area of cloning, and you might want to cite some papers in the area of certain cloning techniques you're going to apply to your project specifically. So that's what we're talking about here. Okay. Again, the guidance is indicated here for each of these sections. Then you want to give us an experimental design and methodology you're going to be using. So here you're going to describe how you're going to design your experiments or your field work, whatever it might be, to gather the data you'll need to test your hypothesis. Okay, so this section should really link back to your hypotheses. So it should be obvious how the methods and design you've employed here is going to yield data that's going to allow you to test that hypothesis. If those 2 things don't match, it's going to be a confusing or not very compelling proposal. And then finally, what are you going to do with those data, right? So this section on data analysis asks you to kind of describe how are you going to analyze those data? What kind of statistical tests are you going to use? Are you going to use some kind of bioinformatics analysis? Are you going to do some kind of other analysis on those data? So it doesn't have to be statistics. It could be another analysis that's more appropriate for the field of research you're working in. Okay, so whatever's appropriate, you can kind of discuss here. Again, ask your supervisor if you have any questions, if they have any advice for any of this. Finally, we've added a box here for the COVID-19 contingency plan. So that's going to be really important. And we've allocated about 200 words to this. So that means give us a fairly good outline of what you've discussed with your supervisor as to what you will do in case of various different COVID-19 scenarios. So say, for example, you want to do a lab project. Suddenly the labs get closed down because there's a second wave outbreak and there's another national lockdown. What do? You haven't had a chance to go into the lab yet, collect your data. So what is the contingency plan? That's why you have that here, so you can fall back on that and get the project done using the contingency plan. And there's a bunch of options here presented, how you could kind of source data, for example, that if you can't collect data for yourself. And you might also want to discuss ways in which you could use limited data, right? So what is a minimum viable project, essentially? That's what you should be aiming for. Okay. Once you've completed all those sections, there's a section down here at the bottom where you're going to be asked to upload a risk assessment, an ethics checklist, and an equipment list. Okay? So the equipment list is going to be a list of the materials and the machinery or whatever kit you're going to need to complete your project. This is going to be very useful for the technicians to see what they will have to provide for you when you go into the labs. It also will help you to write your risk assessment because you will see all the potential chemicals and electrical gear and so forth you will have, you'll be using that might produce a hazard that you have to assess in the risk assessment. So if you click on these links, there's links here. Each of them will take you to a linked document. Now it isn't working in my version of the workbook because this is not the live version of the workbook. The one you will have a link here that you can click on that will take you to a document that downloads. That's going to be a template for the equipment list available through this link. There's a template for the risk assessment available through this link, and there is an ethics checklist form available through this link. All of those have guidance included in them that kind of tells you how to use them, or they should be very, somewhat self-explanatory anyway. So you can use those templates, complete them, and then upload them once they've been completed by the evidence rosette down here. And if you read the PebblePad guide that is on the Blackboard, it'll tell you how to upload the things. The way you do that is you click on the little rosette here, it'll open a little window where you can then select your upload, and you'll have to select an asset. You'll have to first create an asset to attach to this page in the workbook. You upload a file, for example, from your computer. That becomes an asset, and then you have to, in a second step, click that asset to make it available or to attach it to this page in the workbook. If you have any difficulty along those lines, do let me know, and I can talk you through it in more detail. But yeah, this is where you then upload the completed files. There's also some specialist cost forms and specialist risk assessment forms that you might need for some of the more common projects. But if you're doing something quite unusual and you need a specialist risk assessment, then you should talk to your supervisor to see if they need to provide any specialist risk assessments or do those with you. Okay? So here's a checklist that you can tick off once you've done the various different things: the risk assessment, the ethics checklist, the equipment list. Once you've done all those, and remember the risk assessment, it will say in the risk assessment itself, but you need to send that off to your supervisor and to technicians to get a signature to say, yes, we've seen this and we've agreed this, okay? The ethics checklist only needs a signature from your supervisor, and the equipment list doesn't need any signatures, okay? So each of those forms will say what you need to have signed off, okay? So you can check off what you've completed. Once you've done all that, you can tell your supervisor, hey, I'm done. I've got my proposal done. I've got my forms uploaded. And once they've agreed that and saying, yeah, that's all fine, you are good to go and start your project. Before you've done all those things, you should not begin your project. So it's really important you make sure all this stuff is complete before you can begin your project. Okay, the last thing I want to mention is down here you'll have a two boxes that are, it says here, only for the assessor, and that's going to be your supervisor. That's where we're going to provide the marks and the feedback for your proposal, which is going to be the first assessment, like I mentioned. So the feedback is going to go here, the mark is going to go here, and that's going to become available once, obviously, the deadline comes around in the end of October 2020. Okay, the last page I want to highlight, and I think this will already be available for you, is relevant to your actual practical work. Once that gets going, this contains guidance on how you can book out lab space in the labs, for example, how you what to do if you need to do out of hours work, which you really should avoid, so plan for not doing that. The lone working rules we have, so you have to have a buddy with you if you're going to do field work, for example. So this lays out some basic rules about how you would go about doing the regular work of your project. And then finally, so say for example you've completed your proposal, you've uploaded all the forms, your supervisor has said, yeah, that's good to go, you can start your project. They will then make available to you, once you've notified them of that, they will make available to you the weekly logbook that's over here. So that will only release once you've completed the proposal. You'll see it has a structure here of 15 different weeks, and those are the weeks of the different parts of the 2 semesters. So semester 1, first half of semester 1 is weeks 1 through 4. Then you have a mid-semester meeting. Then you have the next few weeks. Then you have the end of semester meeting with your supervisor. And then you have the first 5 weeks of semester 2. And then a final sum up, end of practical work meeting. And that's where you're going to have the deadline for the logbook, right? So this second assessment of the workbook, which is going to be the practical logbook, that is not going to be due until the middle of semester 2. Okay, so that's quite a while away still. You will complete weekly entries, okay? So each week, if I click into here, for example, you will have a weekly entry where you can type in an account of what you've done that week. So that should have dates. It should have dated entries. So what day did you do what? It should give a sense of reflection. So how were you thinking about your project? What were you doing? What were you planning? How did you respond to challenges? What were your thoughts when you saw the data, coming back from your experiment, or whatever it might be? So there should be an element of diary to it, but it shouldn't be excessively detailed to the point of today I tied my shoelaces before coming to the lab. Not that level of detail. So the point of a logbook really is that you create a record of your work that anyone else could pick up and then replicate what you've done as a scientist. Okay, could repeat what you've done to see if the data you got hold true for them as well. So that is going to be your weekly entries. Your supervisor, remember, will be able to see your logbook at any time. So if you need feedback, formative feedback at any time, ask them and they will be able to look at your logbook remotely and be able to provide feedback for you, okay? every week of your logbook, you can attach evidence. So evidence might be some photographs you took. It might be some a Word document with some links to papers you've read. It might be a whole bunch of things, right? And I should mention here that practical work or work on your project is not just work in the lab or work in the field. It could be work analyzing data. It could be work reading papers. It could be preparing your project and writing emails to technicians to sort out the risk assessment. So all these things can go into your logbook. It should be a complete record of all the work you've done during the first and second semester of your project. If you're doing work over the summer, so in some rare cases you might be doing field work over the summer, for example, your supervisor can make this logbook available to you. You can then start recording work into the logbook in week 1, week 2, over the summer, for example, as soon as the logbook becomes available to you. However, what you then shouldn't do is then spend extra time, an additional 10 weeks or whatever during the semesters, to do even more work, right? So 15 weeks practical work is really all we expect from any project, and that is more than enough to do a nice, simple, straightforward, and elegant project. Okay, so again, speak to your supervisor if you have any questions about how and when you can use the logbook. And then finally down here, for each weekly entry, there's a meetings and communications box where you can enter in any kind of exchanges you've had with technicians, with supervisors. This is really useful to demonstrate your engagement with the project, with the module. Okay. The last thing to mention is that you'll have these interim meetings, like for example the mid-semester meeting, where you will be meeting with your supervisor, because the next 5 weeks, so for example at the beginning you will only be able to see weeks 1 through 4 of your workbook. Weeks 5 through 15 will be locked. So you'll have to meet with your supervisor, or when I say meet, of course it can happen remotely, it can happen via phone call or whatever. You'll have to speak to your supervisor, agree that, how's your progress been, how are things going, do you need any help, need any support, have you got all the gear you need? And once they've had that chat with you and everything's fine to progress, they will unlock the next 6 weeks of your logbook, okay? So then you can then start recording the next few weeks. So there's the little bottlenecks. We want you to kind of show your engagement, show you're involved with your project, have a chat with your supervisor to make the next few weeks of your logbook available to you, okay? And at each of those points, we also have a support tool to help you with that conversation with your supervisor. It's called the Traffic Lights tool, and you'll have a link here that will allow you to download a spreadsheet that is pre-formatted to allow you to use the tool. It's pretty self-explanatory. You'll use the tool to kind of reflect on your development and on your things you're worried about, the things you're comfortable with on the module. Rate those using a color code, green being super confident, red being super worried, and then sharing that with your, uploading it here. So there's an upload field down here. Upload your Traffic Lights tool sheet here, and then your supervisor will be able to give you some formative feedback for your logbook, and also in the conversation they'll be able to use the Traffic Lights tool sheet to look at and identify very quickly areas where you need support and where you need help, and discuss those with you very effectively. Okay, I'll give you some more guidance about that once we get to that stage, but that's ages in the future for most of you. So for now, the thing you really want to think about is getting started with the proposal. Okay, so and as you can see here, it's warning me I haven't saved for 20 minutes, so I'd want to save my work now. If I put any entries into here, keep saving, keep regularly saving and updating. And a couple of really important housekeeping points. Don't open multiple copies of the logbook in different devices. So for example, I have my phone here in front of me. If I kept this copy here open on my desktop and then open another copy on my phone, that would mess up what is being saved and how it's being saved. So do avoid only have one copy open at a moment at any given time. Save your work regularly, and then you can use a logout function over here to log back out, or you can go back here. So if I click on the little green person up here, I can leave my logbook, or leave my workbook, and then go back to my home page. Okay, so always make sure you leave the workbook properly so you don't get a messed up copy of your workbook. Okay, those are the key points of the online workbook. It should be fairly intuitive to use. Like I showed you, most of the guidance that you need is integrated into the workbook, so you just read that, follow those instructions, and everything should be fairly straightforward and clear. If you do have any questions at all, do get in touch with me at chris.harvey@canterbury.ac.uk. Yeah, let me know how you get on. Okay, have fun on your projects, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.